Welcome to the deep dive. We got a document here, Situational Awareness by Leopold Aschenbrenner, a former OpenAI employee. And wow, it's got us thinking. This look at AI, AGI, superintelligence, global power dynamics, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting how he pulls this all together,
Yes.
just using public info, his
Hmm.
own insights from the field, general knowledge, no insider secrets, but still paints a pretty compelling picture.
Yeah, and it's a future that feels a lot closer than we might think. He starts off talking about the current state of AI, the progress we've seen. I mean, GPT-4 already feels like a huge jump, right? Coding, essays, complex math problems, it's like something out of science fiction.
Oh, absolutely. It's remarkable, really, when you think about it. 4 years ago, GPT-2 was like preschool level,
Mm.
and now GPT-4 is operating like a smart high schooler.
Yeah.
That's a huge leap in such a short time. And Aschenbrenner uses this idea of counting the ohms to explain how these leaps are happening.
Ohms, break that down for us. What's an ohm?
Right, so OS stands for order of magnitude. Basically, it's a tenfold increase. Think about it like
Uh,
a, a kid learning math, right? They start with addition, then multiplication, then maybe fractions. Each step, that's an order of magnitude increase in complexity. Opens up a whole new world of possibilities. That's kind of what's happening with AI. Every time computing power jumps up, algorithms get smarter. We see this qualitative leap in what AI can do.
so it's not just about raw power, it's about how efficiently AI is using that power.
Exactly. And that leads us to Aschenbrenner's prediction. He thinks we could see another GPT-like leap by 2027. We might even reach artificial general intelligence, AGI. And he lays out three factors driving this prediction.
Okay, let's hear it. What are those three factors?
First one is compute. The sheer amount of computing power used to train these AI models, we're talking massive increases, from a single data center for GPT-3 to, get this, a rumored $100 billion cluster being built by Microsoft and OpenAI. To give you an idea of the scale, this rumored cluster, it'd need more power than many U.S. states combined.
Wow, that's a pretty big investment.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's not just about brute force. The algorithms themselves are getting smarter too, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the second factor, algorithmic efficiencies. Algorithms are achieving the same results with less computing power. For example, there's this math benchmark, tests AI's math skills. Its inference efficiency improved nearly 1,000 times in under 2 years.
That's amazing progress. So more power and more efficiency. Got it. What's the third factor? You mentioned unhobbling earlier. What's that about?
Right, so the third factor is what Aschenbrenner calls unhobbling gains. It's like taking the training wheels off a bike. These are simple, relatively simple algorithmic improvements, but they unlock AI's hidden potential. Things like RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback. Basically, it's like giving the AI a tutor, guiding it towards the right answers, the right behaviors. Or there's chain of thought prompting, which lets AI think through problems step by step, much like a human would.
So it's like we're giving AI the tools and guidance it needs to really take off. But what about this data wall issue? Aren't we running out of data to train these huge models on?
Yeah, that's a valid concern, a real challenge. Aschenbrenner acknowledges it too. It's like, imagine trying to teach a child about the world, but you're only showing them the same picture book over and over. Eventually, they memorize the book, but their understanding of the world is going to be pretty limited. That's kind of the problem AI is facing. We're hitting the limits of what we can teach it using just the data we have.
So what can be done about that? Can we actually get around this data wall?
Well, Aschenbrenner believes the labs will figure something out. He points to things like generating synthetic data, basically creating new data from scratch, or maybe figuring out more efficient pre-training methods, ways to squeeze more learning out of the existing data.
So even with the data wall, he still thinks AGI is on the horizon, within the next few years even. But let's take it a step further. What happens after AGI? That's where this whole intelligence explosion idea comes in, right?
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting and maybe a little scary. Aschenbrenner argues that AI progress won't stop at human-level intelligence. Once we have AGI, it could start designing even better AIs, leading to this rapid exponential increase in intelligence.
Like a chain reaction. AI building AI. Getting smarter and smarter at an incredible pace. So we're not just talking about AI surpassing human intelligence, we're talking about exceeding it by, well, who knows how much.
Exactly. Aschenbrenner calls this automated AI research. He estimates that with millions of AGIs working on AI research, we could have the equivalent of 100 million human researchers, all working day and night, potentially at speeds 10, or even 100 times faster than us. Imagine compressing a decade's worth of progress into a single year.
Okay, hold on. That's a lot to take in. So we go from human-level AI to something vastly superhuman, and all in a very short time. But what does that actually mean for the world?
Well, that's where we get into the more serious side of this document. Aschenbrenner spends a lot of time talking about superintelligence and national security, particularly in the context of competition with China.
He uses this phrase, racing to the trillion-dollar cluster, to describe the effort involved in building the next generation of AI. Sounds like he sees an AI arms race brewing.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. He argues that achieving superintelligence ceased will give a decisive economic and military advantage.
He even compares it to the U.S. military dominance during the Gulf War, which was largely due to their technological superiority. So he's suggesting that whoever wins this AI race could have that same level of global power.
That seems to be his take, yeah. And he thinks China's in a good position to be a serious contender.
Right.
He lays out two main ways they could catch up: by outpacing the U.S. in computing power and by potentially stealing key algorithms.
Okay, let's break those down. First, the computing power. You mentioned earlier that this trillion-dollar cluster could require 100 gigawatts of power. That's a mind-boggling amount of energy.
Oh, it is. And that's just for one cluster. But China, they've got a track record of undertaking massive projects. Over the past decade, they've built way more new electricity capacity than the U.S.
So he's saying they could actually pull it off, building these huge AI clusters and surpassing the U.S. in raw computing power.
It's a real possibility, yeah.
Wow, that's a sobering thought. And what about the second point, stealing algorithms?
That goes back to his concerns about security at AI labs, or rather, the lack of it. He argues that if China gets into these labs, steals key algorithms, they could close the technology gap really fast. He actually paints a pretty bleak picture of the current security situation, calling it an afterthought and saying we're practically handing them the secrets. On a silver platter, he says.
He's definitely concerned about that. It sounds like he thinks we need to step up our cybersecurity game if we want to stay ahead in AI development. This is starting to sound like a modern-day Cold War. But with artificial intelligence as the weapon of choice...
Yeah, that's a comparison he makes directly in the document. He even talks about the potential dangers of an AI-powered authoritarian regime, specifically with the CCP in mind.
I can see where he's going with that. AI-controlled, robotic law enforcement, hypercharged mass surveillance, it's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And with this level of technology, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and it's a possibility that clearly worries him. He dedicates a good chunk of the document to warning against it. He stresses that the free world needs to win this AI race to prevent that kind of scenario.
He calls it a matter of the free world's very survival. Okay, so we've got this potential AI arms race, a potential AI-powered authoritarian regime. Is there any good news here? Does he offer any solutions?
Well, he does, and it's a pretty thought-provoking proposal. He calls it the project.
From what I understand, the project is this government-led initiative to control and develop superintelligence. Can you talk more about that? Why does he think that's necessary?
His argument is that private companies, as innovative and driven as they are, they're just not equipped to handle the challenges of superintelligence. They lack the security measures, the chain of command, the ability to make decisions with global consequences. He believes that's where the government needs to step in.
So he's not saying private AI development should end altogether, just that there needs to be a shift in focus during this critical period, almost like a wartime mobilization, but for AI. And he sees this as inevitable, this government-led project.
Yeah, he compares it to the Manhattan Project, where the government led the development of nuclear technology during a time of huge global tension. But then, later on, civilian applications were allowed. He sees a similar trajectory for AI.
That's a bold idea. I imagine it would be pretty controversial, but he seems convinced that it's the only way to make sure superintelligence is developed safely. I'm curious to hear more about how he thinks this project would actually work.
Well, he does lay out some ideas. We can dive into those after a quick break. He suggests working with defense contractors, maybe forming joint ventures with private companies, and involving Congress for oversight to keep things transparent and accountable. Of course, the details are still pretty speculative.
Yeah, I can see how a project like this would need a multifaceted approach, pulling in expertise from both the public and private sectors. But let's step back for a second. Earlier, you compared superintelligence to the development of nuclear weapons. What did you mean by that?
He uses this analogy, bomb versus super, comparing the atomic bomb to the potential advent of superintelligence. The atomic bomb, that was a huge turning point. But the hydrogen bomb, the super, that was an even bigger leap. a 1,000-fold increase in destructive power.
So if AGI is like the atomic bomb, a major breakthrough, then this intelligence explosion leading to superintelligence, that's like the hydrogen bomb, something exponentially more powerful and maybe even more dangerous.
That's the core of his argument, yeah. It's not just about AI surpassing human intelligence. It's about the potential for it to exceed it by orders of magnitude. And what that means for us, well, it's hard to even imagine.
Let's go back to national security for a minute, specifically the competition with China. It sounds like he's convinced this AI arms race is inevitable.
He is, and he argues that whoever controls superintelligence, they'll have a decisive advantage both economically and militarily. He uses the example of the U.S. in the Gulf War. Their technological edge was a big part of their dominance.
So he's saying a similar scenario could play out, but with AI as the deciding factor. And he's worried about China outpacing the U.S. in computing power, building those massive AI clusters we talked about earlier.
Right. He suggests that even though these projects are huge, China's shown they can execute on this scale. Think about their electricity capacity expansion. It's been remarkable.
So they could actually pull it off, build these clusters, and surpass the U.S. in raw computing power.
It's definitely within the realm of possibility.
That's a bit unsettling, to be honest. And he also brought up the risk of China stealing algorithms from U.S. labs.
Yeah, he was pretty critical of the current security measures in place. He even said we're practically handing them the secrets on a silver platter.
So we've got this potential arms race, fueled by massive investments in computing power and the constant threat of espionage. It's a pretty tense situation. But his concerns go beyond just the technology itself, right? He also talks about the danger of an AI-powered authoritarian regime, especially with China's political system.
Yeah, he paints a pretty chilling picture of what that could look like. AI-controlled law enforcement, pervasive surveillance, the ability to silence any opposition without hesitation. It's a hypothetical scenario, but it's not out of the question.
He even frames it as a matter of the free world's very survival. It's a lot to take in, honestly. It feels like we're on the edge of something huge, something with incredible potential, but also terrifying risks.
He's definitely sounding the alarm. He wants us to be aware of the potential pitfalls. As we move into this uncharted territory, he even compares it to the sorcerer's apprentice, conjuring up forces we might not be able to control.
That's a powerful analogy. So what can we do? He proposes the project as a solution. But what does that actually look like in practice? How do we manage something as complex and unpredictable as superintelligence?
That's the million-dollar question. And to be honest, Aschenbrenner doesn't claim to have all the answers. He acknowledges the challenges, and they're not small ones.
What kind of challenges?
Well, there's managing the intelligence explosion itself, preventing AI-powered WMDs from proliferating, navigating the global political landscape, and all while trying to make sure superintelligence aligns with human values. It's a tall order.
He even says we're not prepared for the speed and intensity of what's coming. It sounds like a call to action, a warning to get ready.
He stresses the need for a sane chain of command, robust security measures, a clear focus on aligning AI with our values. These are all critical considerations moving forward, and he acknowledges that, despite its flaws. The government's track record is still better than leaving this to private companies alone.
So the project is basically a call for a coordinated effort, led by the government to guide the development of superintelligence, with an emphasis on safety and security. It's a big idea, and it definitely raises a lot of questions.
Absolutely. Like, how do we ensure democratic oversight in a project this big? How do we balance national security with fostering innovation in the private sector? These are just some of the things we need to figure out.
He did say that the project wouldn't necessarily mean the end of private AI development, right?
Right. He imagines a future where, after this initial period, this intense focus on national security, private companies can use superintelligence for good, for a whole range of beneficial applications.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There's potential for good to come from this, but it requires careful planning, responsible execution.
Exactly. He's not naive about the difficulties. But he's not entirely pessimistic either. He sees a path forward, but it's a path that requires careful thought, collaboration, and a willingness to make some tough choices.
It's a lot to process, for sure. And it feels like we're just scratching the surface of this issue. It's complex, and it's changing so rapidly. But before we go any further, I think it's important to point out that Aschenbrenner doesn't just focus on the dangers. He talks about the potential benefits of superintelligence, too.
Oh, that's right, amidst all the warnings. He does offer a glimmer of hope. He talks about the potential for superintelligence to be used for good.
Can you give us some examples? What kind of benefits is he talking about?
Well, he suggests it could be used to solve some of humanity's biggest challenges. Imagine AI helping us tackle climate change, cure diseases, explore space, unlock new scientific discoveries. These are just some of the possibilities.
So while the risks are real and they're serious, there's also this potential for positive change. It's a balancing act. We need to approach this with both caution and optimism. What else does he touch on in the document?
Well, he talks about this concept of AGI realism. He says we need to move past this polarized debate around AI, where some people are predicting doom and gloom and others think it's going to be a technological utopia. He advocates for a more nuanced, realistic approach, recognizing both the benefits and the risks, and the need for careful planning.
So it's about finding a balance, acknowledging the complexities of AI and working to shape it in a way that benefits humanity.
Exactly. He's not trying to dictate a specific outcome, but he wants to encourage a thoughtful, informed approach, one that considers both the opportunities and the risks.
That's a powerful message. We can't afford to sit on the sidelines and just watch this unfold. We all have a role to play in shaping the future of AI.
He even suggests some practical steps, things individuals can do.
Oh, interesting. Like what can the average person actually do to get ready for this AI future?
Well, he talks about learning more about AI, obviously,
Yeah.
having conversations about it, with friends and family, just to kind of broaden the awareness and advocating for responsible development, that sort of thing.
So it's about empowering people, right? Making them active participants, not just passive bystanders.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway from this document, I think. Even with all these huge changes on the horizon, we still have a say. We can make choices that influence how AI develops, how it impacts our lives.
He keeps using this phrase, situational awareness, throughout the document. What do you think he means by that?
I think he's emphasizing the need to really understand where things are at. The current state of AI, how fast it's developing,
Yeah.
the potential benefits and risks, the choices we face. It's a call to pay attention, to be informed, to get involved.
It's like he's saying, wake up, people, this is happening. This isn't sci-fi anymore, it's real, and we need to be ready.
Yeah. And he's also critical of what he calls the polarized discourse around AI. You've got the doomsayers on one side predicting the end of the world, and the techno-utopians on the other thinking everything's going to be perfect.
He thinks both extremes are unhelpful, right? We need a more balanced, realistic approach.
Exactly. It's not about giving in to fear or hype. It's about having a thoughtful, informed discussion.
He calls for AGI realism, acknowledging that AGI is coming, that it has both potential and risks, and that we need to start planning for both.
It's about finding that middle ground, that balance.
It's a fascinating document, really thought-provoking. Aschenbrenner doesn't shy away from the big questions, and he definitely leaves us with more to think about than we started with.
Yeah, he ends on a pretty personal note, actually, talking about his own feelings as this reality of superintelligence gets closer.
Oh.
He mentions feeling the burdens of history, the weight of knowing what might be coming, and the responsibility to try and steer things in the right direction. He also says something that really stuck with me. He says, the world is incredibly small. When the facade comes off, it's usually just a few folks behind the scenes who are the live players, who are desperately trying to keep things from falling apart.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy statement. The idea that a small group of people might hold the fate of the world in their hands.
It really underscores the importance of individual action.
Yeah.
Even seemingly small choices can have a big impact. It's a call to action for those who are aware of what's happening.
So ultimately, I think this document is a call for awareness, a call for dialogue, for collective action, to make sure that superintelligence benefits everyone.
It's a reminder that we're not just along for the ride. We have the power to shape the future. And that power comes with a huge responsibility.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. We've covered a lot: the current state of AI, superintelligence, the implications for global power.
We talked about the benefits and risks, the need for situational awareness, responsible development, informed decision-making.
It's a lot to think about, and it's clear that this is just the start of a much bigger conversation.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you some insights, some food for thought, as we navigate this new landscape, this AI-powered future.
The future of AI is still being written, and we all have a part to play in shaping it. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.